welcome to Really Wellness. Today I'm here with the infamous Dr. Eve, who is a clinical sexologist and relationship expert. And today we're going to be talking about sexual well-being in relationships, improving our intimacy, and also the impact that technology has on our sexual well-being. So, Dr. Eve, I don't know if maybe you'd like to start by telling us a little bit more about what a clinical sexologist is, and who you are and what you do to help people improve their sexual well-being.
So thank you, Annabelle, for inviting me to be part of your initiative. It's very exciting, and I only wish you wellness, healthy wellness as you navigate this space. So my area of interest is in complex relationships and in the sexuality that goes along with it, in sexual rights, sexual wellness. I'm an advocate or defender of women's rights. And also my interest is very much in trauma, because I believe that relationships, even healthy ones, are pretty traumatic. So whether we have any kind of childhood developmental trauma, they're going to impact on our ability and our way of being in relationship, being intimate and being sexual, or whether we've just had an incident, a PTSD incident, which has derailed us, that affects our intimacy and our sexuality as well. So I know that sexual wellness is at the core of what people say they long for, but really what it is they long for is the ability to feel well, to feel whole in the world. So what do I do as a clinical sexologist? My training was in San Francisco, where I did my doctorate in human sexuality, and I already had a master's in clinical social work. So I work as a clinician, working with people, mostly with couples, who may present with a sexual symptom, although that's kind of less, more and more these days. In the early days, it used to be a lot around sexual medicine. People would be presenting with ejaculation problems or erection problems. And that's kind of petered off because I don't do sexual medicine. Other people specialize in that, and I object to pathologizing or medicalizing sexuality, because sexuality is so complex and we're so impacted by so many different factors that it's really difficult just to say this is a biological problem, this is a medical problem. Medical issues and medication impact on sexual functioning. So I'm much more interested in how do we manage that, and how do we manage the relationship that brings up to oneself and to specifically to another or to many others in one's intimate life. So my work is with couples where they, as I said, either present with a direct sexual problem, and even if they do, there's always going to be other issues that have caused or created or co-created the so-called sexual problem. So I'm not so much interested in the sexual symptoms, I'm interested in what causes them or why people symptomize in a sexual way, because there's so many other real issues, and those are the real issues that I'm interested in. So my work is really in the area of complex relationship structures, and through that I moved into the world of technology because of research that I did, and I'm sure we'll get into that. So my work is really in the deep intimacy of people's pain. Not really pleasure, people don't come to me when they have pleasure, but it's really around the pain of intimacy, whether it's with a parent and a child, or whether it is with friendship, or whether it is with self, because there's so many single people, and then of course with relationship to others.
I think that's so interesting that you've kind of touched upon like the pain of intimacy, because I think, you know, people do so much kind of associate sexual intimacy with pleasure. But I think you're right in that kind of so many of the barriers that we have when it comes to either our own kind of intimacy with our own bodies or intimacy in relationships are often based on either developmental traumas or kind of other incidents that we've experienced in life that create negative associations or barriers or blockers. So I think that's a fascinating way of looking at it. And I wanted to know, is that what inspired you to go into this field, or are there kind of other elements that really pushed you in this direction?
No, look, I've been doing this 27 years. I have been doing this work. So before that, I was practicing as a family therapist, because I had a master's in family therapy. And I then had the whole family in the room together. And I had children who had been brought into me who symptomized with some kind of behavioral problem. And it could have been bedwetting or encopresis or behavioral oppositional behavior, whatever it was. There were real symptoms that the children were presenting. And I realized early on that actually the children were symptomatic because the parents were problematic. And so I got rid of all the children and all the grannies and all the aunties who were in the therapy room and just said, I want to work with couples. And so I then had couples sitting in front of me. And because I am South African and I trained in an apartheid era South Africa, we had a lot of sexual censorship. And so there was no access to any kind of training in sex therapy at all, in sexuality at all. And so as I started working with couples, they would raise the issue of sexuality. And I was, flummoxed. It's like, I don't have any training in this. I don't know anything about it. And I then kind of read whatever there was. And at that time in pre-1994, there wasn't a lot of stuff that was around in terms of research. And then in 1994, democracy broke in this country, and I had opportunity to go and become accredited as a couple and sex therapist in America, which is what I did. I trained in Canada and in America and became certified then as an American with the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors and Therapists, of which I'm now one of their board members actually. So I remain certified with them. And then I went on to do my doctorate in human sexuality in San Francisco, because I realized that I needed the extra training. And it was also at that time that I was introduced to my first vibrator, because we didn't have anything like that in South Africa. And from that time, I started importing sex toys into the country. So I kind of opened up this whole world of sexuality to South Africa. And literally 1994, in October, I walked into an independent radio station and I said, I want to talk about sex on the radio. And it was on a Monday, and by Friday, I was live. And I did my first live radio show in October 27 years ago. So that's how I kind of got into it. It wasn't like, oh, this is a really sexy profession. I just was called to it because I felt there was a huge need for it. And there was in this country, because then HIV/AIDS was revealed. And then gender-based violence was revealed. And so I had a lot of education that I needed to do.
I think that's amazing. And I think it's so heartwarming to hear that you've kind of been on the front line of that fight for a really long time, because I think openness about sexuality and sexual liberation is still an ongoing fight, especially for women. All over the world. And I'm particularly happy that you mentioned vibrators, because something that we kind of explored when we started looking at sexual well-being kind of around self-pleasure was how often, in particular for women, vibrators are almost like the gateway to that sexual awakening, the kind of first point of opening, because you realize you have power over your own pleasure and the ability to take control of yourself and your body. So yeah, I mean, it's really, really awesome to hear. And I mean, talking of vibrators kind of reminds me of another subject. I mean, this isn't strictly the technology I'm talking about, but more broadly, I know that we've touched on kind of the effect of technology on sexuality, and that's something that you really specialize in. I think that that technology, whether that's kind of our phones, our computers, the internet, whatever it is, does impact our sexual well-being and intimacy in relationships.
Well, it certainly revolutionized our sexuality. It revolutionized our intimacy enormously. So just to give you a very brief history of how I was once again brought into it in a way, because I keep following my gut and keep following my heart and what calls me. And I started doing research with a company called Ashley Madison, and this was in 2013, who had their byline as "Life is short, have an affair." And I yeah, I was really opposed to them when they first launched in South Africa. And I then had women, married women, who were coming into my therapy room saying to me, I've been on the site and I've started chatting and I am so happy and I don't feel guilty and I'm happily married. I don't want to leave my husband, but something's woken in me and I'm like having the best sex ever. And I'm also feeling my self-esteem has increased and I'm feeling so much happier and I'm feeling more amorous with my husband and life is pretty sweet. You know, is there something wrong with me? And from those many women who kept coming into my therapy room, I reached back to Ashley Madison and said, Ashley, I want to do some research with you into this thing which I call cyber infidelity. And that's where my journey began, and did the research for 2 years and then wrote my book, which came out in 2015. So I really kind of dug in deep. I dived in deep into the world of internet dating and put myself online for a number of months, years, and really got an understanding of what technology can do to one's sense of self, intimacy with self, and intimacy with the regular partner, and intimacy with the rest of the world. And it's kind of erupted in that from that time, there has been an enormous opening and acceptance of the rights of people who are non-binary, people who are fluid in terms of their sexual orientation, people who are wanting to have different, what I call relationship structures, people really questioning marriage, people questioning singlehood, friendship. So it's been, you know, magnificent to be part of this whole new relationship structure. And from that, as a clinician, I then was dealing with a very different kind of pain, which really is trauma. And then I realized that, you know, I needed to up my skills in managing. My interventions were not effective enough in managing the couples who were having enormous pain from the discovery of infidelity online, enormous pain. And that's when I started training in trauma, and that was like 5 years ago. And that's become my new passion in really skilling myself up to deal with the traumas that come from infidelity, as primarily infidelity, cyber infidelity, and then also any form of relationship. The intimacy of that is, you know, so difficult. And I just want to come back to also something you said, Annabelle, around the power of vibrators, because they are incredible for giving women a sense of power. And that's the best way for a woman to become orgasmic. You know, like back in the day, people would spend hours in therapy with me and lots of money of how do I become orgasmic? And it still is today. It still is like the number one sexual problem that women come to me with. I don't have orgasms. So they do fine. I'll say to them, buy a vibrator and you'll have an orgasm. But there is a huge problem, because how do we take that power and how do we take that voice into a partner sex situation? And that's where the trauma starts for women and for partners, because they don't know how to do that. Women don't know how to show men what they enjoy. Men don't know how to ask. Women don't know how to say no. There isn't a discussion on consent. So that's where my interest is. You know, my work is in that area of how do we really get couples to talk, and and that means dealing with their traumas, and how do we feel safe? How do we feel secure? How do we get vulnerable with somebody to be able to show them, tell them, this is what I enjoy sexually. And if you don't do that, there's going to be a disconnect and a detachment, which then leads to pain and all other kinds of mental health issues.
Absolutely. And I think the point you made there that resonates with me is the trauma of communication, especially in a sexual context. You know, we're, you know, even like you say, if we get to a point where we know what we like, I think, certainly speaking from my own experience and the experience of other women that I know, it takes years to be able to communicate that, you know, even to a casual partner, because there's so much kind of shame and guilt and fear around what it means to say, no, this is what I want, this is what turns me on. So I think that's a really, really valid point. But in my opinion, once you can get through that hurdle, having that kind of intimacy and that kind of control both within yourself and with your partner over what you want, what you like, can be incredibly beneficial, not just physically but also mentally. And I wanted to get your thoughts a little bit more on how you think more broadly sex can really impact our mental and physical health positively.
I don't want to do the usual thing of what people will say, which you can read in every magazine, because there's been studies on the mental health benefits of being sexual because of the release of certain hormones and neurotransmitters. We know that the releasing of all of that during a sexual episode brings enormous relaxation, relief, release. It's wonderfully healthy from a mental and physical point of view. People are having regular sexual activity with a safe partner. There is nothing that concretizes one's sense of self and one's sense of intimacy. So people who are having that know the value of that. It's just a very difficult thing to actually have. And I'm going to bring it back to trauma, because if you have had, and unfortunately the majority of people have had some kind of childhood trauma, whether it's been abuse, neglect, or abandonment, we find it very difficult to trust, to surrender, to feel safe and secure with the person. And as a result of that, there isn't a letting go, a full mindful presence of body in that space to be able to enjoy the pleasure of what sexual connection can bring. Because we can have orgasms alone. We seek and we long for that sense of intimacy with another, where we feel seen and heard, acknowledged and attended to, needed. And it's not through genitals. It's through heart to heart, eye gazing, presence, that people get to feel that way. So my work is to get people emotionally regulated enough, managing the trauma, managing the detachment, managing the stuff that they carry from childhood, in order to get them liberated enough to be able to have whatever kind of sexual experience they want to have that feeds them and makes them feel connected. And I think we all know now from COVID-19 that the most painful and mentally debilitating experience for all of us has been the social disconnect, the social distancing, the feeling so alone, isolated, even when you're living with somebody. Because we know that the part of the purpose of the brain is to have social connection, because we can't live without each other. So the brain pushes us to want to socially connect with another, whether it's online chatting or whether it's face-to-face or whether it's in bed. And when you don't have an ability to do that because of depression, anxiety, which are caused by childhood trauma, you're not going to feel satisfied. You may present your body, you may give your vagina, you may actually have an erection, but you're not having the feeling of what I repeat we long for, which is a sense of presence with each other.
And I think, we live in a world where that sense of presence, or the benefits of that sense of presence, are often dampened. The way that sex is presented to us is not very often as a kind of real intimate, loving connection. Pornography is a great example of this. It's the most extreme example, but even on mainstream television, a lot of what we see is, for want of a better word, like fucking, rather than intimate connection and sharing a really embodied and kind of mindful experience with someone.
No, I agree with you.
And I think that comes from a number of places, but I think also people in kind of, or the mainstream media almost treat sex like a commodity, right? Like sweets or candy. And the way that we consume sex is almost in the same way that we consume junk food, right? It's easy, it's simple. And the more and more we get into that mentality, the further and further we get away from that kind of intimate connection. And I wanted to ask you, kind of as you work with your clients, and I'm sure you yourself in your personal life have learned to build those connections and overcome that trauma, do you think that you see kind of more benefits for your mental well-being over time, as well as direct benefits to your sex life and your relationship? through practicing this kind of intimacy work?
In mindfulness and practicing, or living the practice of mindfulness, which is daily meditation and journaling and walking and healthy food and exercise and social connection. All those things are there. The mindfulness practice, a way of living in a meaningful and mindful way, is to be able to, what we call, emotionally regulate us, which means bring us into presence. And when you're in presence with somebody, you're able to make better decisions. You're able to connect. You're able to really feel, sense from a sensual point of view, what the connection is all about. So, of course, your experience is heightened. If you're going to be emotionally dysregulated in a state of fight or flight or freeze, where you're just frozen, there's no way that you can actually be present in that sexual interaction. And I just want to say as well that I don't have an agenda in terms of everybody has to have this wonderful intimate connection. It's a choice, and we know that it has enormous benefits to people. But there's a place for, casual sex and hookups and just fucking, whether it's with a regular partner or with somebody new. I have no judgment around that, and I think there isn't a place for that. There is, however, research into hookups and looking at the positives and the negatives around it and the feelings of mental well-being. And yeah, in all the research, it keeps coming out that for women specifically, there isn't a level of satisfaction. For men, there is a higher level of satisfaction, but there still isn't that same satisfaction as what we all long for, which is to connect with. You can have it with more than one. Doesn't mean that you have to have a heteronormative relationship where it's just one person all the time. You can have multiple partners, but you want to, in those moments, feel the connection. So I kind of have a protocol for people. If you're going to be hooking up, you've got to do that respectfully. You still have to act respectfully towards each other. You have to be really present with each other and make that person feel you are the one and only for me for now. For now. And even after we're done, I'm going to be respectful and I'm going to be kind. I'm going to put you in a cab, or I'm going to let you sleep over, or whatever it is you choose to do. And I'm even going to message you the next morning to say thank you. There has to be that level of kindness and compassion, respect that we treat each other with. So whatever kind of sexual interaction you choose to have consensually, it's still all done in a way that makes us feel whole, without women especially feeling slutty and dirty and shameful and regretful. No. If it's consensual, you want to have that kindness that comes along with it.
I completely agree. And I think that's a point that people just aren't taught in the way that they should be. And if they are, they often forget. I can only speak from my own experience as a woman and listening to other female friends. But, men in those situations don't always treat people as nicely as they could. Some women don't either. But it seems like casual sex is correlated with feeling like you can be dismissive of someone, or somehow unkind to them, which I think is completely unfair, because ultimately at the end of the day, even if it's not that you're sharing great loving intimacy, you're still sharing an intimacy, and it's a very kind of raw, primal, vulnerable experience to have sex with someone. Do you think that technology, obviously there's been a huge rise in dating apps. In fact, I've experienced them myself, and I only have positive reviews, but I've heard a lot of negative kind of feedback on them. And I was wondering if you think that kind of technology, and other forms of technology that enable us to kind of access sex and sexual intimacy quite easily, can sometimes get in the way of that kindness, or create an environment where we see sex not as something positively shared, but as just something we can have and throw away, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it depends so much on what your intention is. And obviously I like people to be mindful and to think about intention. What is your intention of getting online? If it's just for sex, present yourself in that way, so that there isn't any kind of fooling or ghosting, because that's, ghosting is a horrible experience for everybody to have. It's somebody in extreme form taking flight, and it's their own emotional dysregulation, inability to connect, to be intimate, to be able to have something committed, even for the moment. And it's just a horrible experience for women to have. So it's about how you present yourself. You know, am I presenting myself in a way which is authentic? I'm here to meet new people. I'm here, which may include sex. I'm here just to be sexual. I don't want any commitment. And I hear men complain about that a lot. I have to say that even though, you know, for the sisterhood, I do think that women betray each other a lot, and send mixed messages to men, where they will say, oh, no, you know, I don't want a relationship. I'm cool with just casual sex. I'm cool with just hanging out with you. And then when the sexual episode happens, boom, bang, something happens to her, and she feels entitled to have him, for him to connect with her, to text her, to see her. And he gets really confused because he thought they had an agreement, which meant that there wouldn't be any of these ties, which he's trying to run away from. And suddenly he's got a woman who's not trying to keep connected to him. And for whatever his reasons are, he doesn't do well with that kind of connection and commitment. So it's about really stating intention. And what was really interesting during this time of COVID-19 is that the bits and pieces of research that have come out, or conversations that have come out, is how that has changed as well. And because people were in so much trauma, less so now, but were in such a state of shock and trauma and isolation, that when they connected with each other on dating apps, they became more real. The conversations were a little denser, meaning a little deeper. It wasn't just like, so, you know, show me your breasts, or what are you wearing under your pants or something, you know, let me see you. It wasn't straight into that. It was like, how are you feeling? How anxious are you? How are you managing the situation? So it went into a different, beautiful level of actual sharing of emotions. And that immediately is going to bring a sense of more intimacy and connection. And that immediately would shift it into a different kind of courtship, where sex would flow, where it wouldn't be just the beginning and the end of that connection. So I think, you know, I would hope that we could continue that.
Absolutely, and I guess that leads me on to kind of my next question, which was whether you thought had been a rise in people having difficulty in intimacy and sexual relationships during lockdown. But it sounds like certainly in casual relationships you're actually seeing that improving. I'm just wondering kind of what your thoughts are on how you think lockdown in general and this coronavirus has affected relationships and intimacy and sex.
Right. So this is, again, just anecdotal. I've got no research on it, just anecdotal from my practice and also from my readings of other people's experiences. People in casual sex situations or online situations, I heard from women who were saying, I'm having the best time of my life, because there was protection of the screen. So there was a sense of like, I can show off, I can be nude, I can choose who I want to hang out with. There was a sense of power, because there wasn't the next step of, okay, let's meet for coffee later, let's have a drink later. They knew that they couldn't do that. And so there was a freedom that came for women around being present in that space, because they felt they couldn't be attacked, they could be harassed, but they also had the power to cut it off, because that's always the risk of online, huge risk of being online, which everybody has to be alerted and aware of. In terms of couples, we saw a decline in sexual interest, which one would expect, because that's what trauma does to you. It will take away the dopamine and the serotonin and the feel-good hormones and get you into survival mode. And when you're in that mode, you're not in a place where you really want to be making whoopee.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting because kind of almost everyone who I've spoken to in this field has said the same thing, specifically around couples. You know, I think especially kind of at the beginning of when this all started, certainly in the UK, I don't know about in South Africa, there was a lot of kind of sensationalization in the media around, you know, couples are going to be having so much sex and there's going to be a baby boom and all of this. And actually, it's not true. For a number of reasons. And yet I think it's made a lot of people kind of feel very alone who are single. However, it sounds like technology is actually the positive piece here, which kind of goes against, I suppose, the way that people usually think about dating apps as a form of connection.
So it was so necessary that we had this virus at the time when there is internet and people could keep socially connected and not feel more isolated and alone than what what we all have and what we all do feel.
Absolutely. I was going to ask you, so what are some key steps, kind of firstly as individuals, say as single individuals, looking for kind of intimate relationships, can we take to improve our sex lives and sexual well-being? And then kind of as a couple, what are kind of some other steps that one can take?
Annabelle, I'm again going to not go into the traditional sex therapy because that's not what I practice anymore. In saying, well, if you light the candles and if you put on the sexy underwear, you're sure to light it. It doesn't work like that. What my work is and what my absolute passion is investing in people being in an emotionally regulated space. Because if you can emotionally regulate, you're going to be able to be more present. And if you're more present, you're much more inclined to want to be sexual. So the work really, really is about being with oneself, really knowing what are my passions, what gives me meaning, what gives me purpose, and what is it that I want from a relationship. Do I want the thing called relationship? Maybe I just want to have, friendships. There's so many single women people in the world, people who choose to be single in the world. So this is a very significant relationship structure where people are taking a stand and saying, my primary relationship is with myself and with friends. And then I invite in other people when and how I want to, and let it run its course into however it meets with my own vision. Because this is a time for us all to be recreating vision and to be thinking differently about what we want from relationships, from sexuality, finding our voices to be able to find the courage, what we call courage and confidence, to be able to be expressive enough. But it requires really not only finding courage with yourself, but being really boundaried and really clear around, I know how to regulate myself. So if I am in a sexual space, I'm going to be able to bring my voice into that place. And I'm going to be able to say, this is really bad sex, and this is what would really work for me. How do we bring that in? And of course, one always has to weigh up the risks, because so many women are at risk of abusive relationships and of violence. So one wants to bear that in mind, that women are really at risk, and we want to be able to be so present with our bodies that we realize the risk before we get into a situation, when we're in the situation, and how do we manage to get out of it. That's just the danger part of it. But to be fully present, and that means being fully present on a daily basis, as I said, with your own mindfulness practice. And then you will not tolerate anything less. That's the ideal. You will not tolerate anything less than what your body dictates to you feels right. And in fact, this morning I just posted on Facebook, there was a horrific murder of a woman in South Africa who was 8 months pregnant, 28 years old, and she was stabbed and hung from a tree, murdered allegedly by a boyfriend, a married boyfriend. And again, I put up, the warning signs, the red flags, the risk factors, and women have to know that all the time, and we feel it in our bodies. We betray ourselves. We feel when it doesn't feel comfortable with this person, and yet we stay, linger longer, have the sex, feel the discomfort around it, and we go back for more. And there's no blame around that. That's because of our own traumas that we've had that we need to attach in that way. But it's being present in your body, and that's where the joy comes from. Dancing, moving, being in community. That's how we find the joy. And then we won't, I repeat, tolerate anything that doesn't feel joyful in our bodies. It doesn't make our hearts sing. And it could be a one-night stand. It could be a long-term relationship. You really want to be honoring those parts, all the parts of yourself that bring you into a place of deep intimacy with yourself and then with others. You won't tolerate less if you do the work.
Absolutely. And I think you've brought up kind of a few interesting points that resonated with me there. The first is, I think a lot of the advice that we get given on kind of regular blogs and in magazines, and like you say, you hear on television all the time, actually isn't very beneficial to either creating intimacy with ourselves or with others, because you can buy as many sets of lingerie as you want, but if you're not feeling grounded and mindful and present, then you're not going to have a mindful, present and highly enjoyable experience with your partner. The other is around kind of trauma and being aware of trauma. Something really interesting that actually my mother said to me when I started kind of doing quite a bit on sexual wellness was, so much of what we're taught as women, and this isn't in a sexual context, but certainly in kind of my generation, and I believe in generations previous, is that we are, tools for someone else's pleasure, or kind of our pleasures come second to other people's in life. And so I think we sometimes suppress that kind of voice that says, no, this isn't right, or that doesn't feel good, or maybe you should ask for this. And I think that can prevent us from achieving what we want to within ourselves and with our partners, from both a kind of mental and physical health perspective. Something that kind of has been quite helpful to me in terms of finding that mindfulness and that kind of space within myself where I feel confident and present in my own body, and then I'm able to kind of express that with a partner, is things like blogs, podcasts, shows, kind of reading up quite a bit about this. And I was wondering if kind of there are any resources that you would recommend that people look at in this space, to kind of achieve that sense of mindfulness and to improve their intimacy.
Well, obviously I'm going to send everybody to my website. I like to blogs and also what I do is I produce 3 times a week free emails to anybody who wants them. So everybody just has to email me, dreve@dreve.co.za, and they will get them. And every second day there is a different blog, there is a different email for you to engage with. So today I did people love quizzes and love self-reflection and checking in with partners as well. Looking at it's time to check in with your relationship. So I posted a whole lot of questions that people should be asking each other right now of where are we? Let's do a check-in with our relationship and see where we are right now, 80-something days into COVID-19. What are we expecting from each other? How satisfied are we with our sexual life? How much appreciation do you want from me? How much time do you need alone? Basic questions that couples need to be all the time questioning with each other. So please feel free to do that and to find what you're looking for. And I do a lot of referencing or referral to different places in all of my blogs. Last week I did my blog and my radio show on addictions and trauma, and looking at why it is that we turn at this time particularly to different forms of addiction, which could be drugs, alcohol, eating, exercise, work, internet, pornography, sex. And so that blog is there now. People can go and look at that and really reflect for themselves and have a deeper understanding and acceptance of their own behavior, and be able to not judge themselves, but reach out for help. So I'm churning out content a lot.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure to speak to you.
Likewise, and really go well with your initiative.